The rain fell in torrents, drenching everything in sight. The streetlights flickered as if protesting the storm, casting eerie shadows across the sleek marble driveway. Aaliyah stood there, soaked to the bone, her shawl clinging to her trembling frame. She clutched a small, battered suitcase in one hand and a bundle of medical reports in the other. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and pleading, remained fixed on the towering figure at the doorway. Sarmad didn't flinch. His expensive suit remained untouched by the weather, protected beneath the grand arch of the porch. His expression was stone-cold, unreadable. "Sarmad, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Her lips were trembling, not just from the cold, but from fear, heartbreak, and the crushing weight of betrayal. "I have nowhere else to go. You promised you'd be there for me. You said you loved me." He exhaled sharply, folding his arms. "I said a lot of things, Aaliyah. That was before you pulled this stunt." She took a shaky step forward. "It's not a stunt. I'm pregnant. This is your child." Sarmad's jaw clenched. "You think this is going to work? You think you can tie me down with a baby?" He stepped forward just enough for the rain to touch his polished shoes, his voice low and sharp like a blade. "I won't let you ruin my life." Aaliyah's tears mixed with the rain streaming down her cheeks. Her heart pounded against her ribcage like it was trying to escape. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Behind him, the faint sound of a woman's laughter echoed through the hallway. A shadow appeared behind the glass-paneled door. Misha, dressed in a silk robe, holding a wine glass in one hand, she leaned against the doorframe like a smug queen surveying the fall of a rival. "She's not your problem anymore," Misha called out, her lips curled into a cruel smile. "Let the poor girl go, cry somewhere else." Sarmad didn't even look back at her. "You need to leave, Aaliyah. Now. Before I call security." For a moment, she stood frozen, eyes locked on his, searching for any flicker of the man she once loved. But there was nothing, only silence and steel. Then she turned. The suitcase felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as she dragged it down the steps and onto the wet sidewalk. Her shoes soaked through instantly. She walked blindly, no destination in mind, the storm swallowing her whole. Cars sped by, splashing muddy water on her clothes. Not one stopped. Finally, she collapsed at the corner of the street, her knees giving out. Clutching her belly, she wept, not just for herself, but for the life growing inside her. Her world had shattered in a single night. From the mansion window, Misha watched with a smug expression as Sarmad turned away. And in that moment, Aaliyah realized she had been thrown away like nothing. But something deep inside her whispered, this wasn't the end. The hostel smelled of damp walls, stale oil, and desperation. Aaliyah stepped into the narrow corridor, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin, leaving a trail of muddy footprints on the cracked tiles. The man at the reception desk didn't even look up as she asked for a room. He simply extended a hand without words, expecting payment. She handed over the last bit of cash she had, money she had been saving for prenatal vitamins. In return, she was given a rusty key and pointed toward a dim staircase that creaked under her steps. Her room was barely more than a box, peeling paint, a single flickering bulb, and a thin mattress on an iron frame. There was no fan, no window, and no sense of safety. That night, she curled into herself on the mattress, clutching her belly, trying to block out the sounds of quarrels, coughing, and late-night footsteps echoing in the hall. Sleep didn't come easily. And even when it did, it brought dreams of what she had lost, Sarmad's touch, the warmth of a home, the promise of a family. The next morning, hunger gnawed at her insides like a wild animal. She wandered through the streets with an empty stomach and swollen feet, searching for work. But every door she knocked on ended the same way, with quick glances at her belly and a firm shake of the head. No one wanted a pregnant woman. Too much liability, too much drama. Even the tailoring shops refused, saying she'd slow them down. The days blurred into each other. Her shoes wore thin, her body grew weaker, and her hope dimmed. She stood in long queues at overcrowded public hospitals, waiting for hours just to be seen by an overworked doctor who barely looked at her. The other women in line stared at her, not with sympathy, but with suspicion and judgment. She could hear them whispering, "Unwed, abandoned, a disgrace." Shame hung around her like a second skin. But she didn't cry. Not anymore. Her tears had dried up the night she was thrown out like trash. One evening, as she stood near a roadside tea stall trying to warm her hands against the kettle's steam, she felt faint. The world tilted, colors bled together, and she stumbled backward. Before she could hit the ground, a pair of wrinkled arms caught her. "Beti sambal ko," came a concerned voice. It was an elderly woman in a simple cotton shawl, her eyes kind, her hands steady. She helped Aaliyah sit, offered her a cup of warm tea without asking questions. That was the first act of kindness Aaliyah had received in weeks. The woman introduced herself as Appa Salma, a retired midwife who lived in a modest home nearby. She'd seen too many women like Aaliyah, cast aside, shamed, and struggling. Without hesitation, she offered Aaliyah a spare room in her home. "It's nothing fancy," she said, "but it's clean and it's safe." Aaliyah hesitated, her pride still clinging to the last scraps of independence. But the tremble in her legs, the ache in her back, and the weight of her unborn child finally pushed her to nod. Appa Salma's home was old but warm. The walls were lined with family photos, prayer beads hung near the door, and the scent of turmeric and ginger lingered in the air. Her room had a fan, a window that let in morning sun, and a clean bed with folded sheets. For the first time in weeks, Aaliyah slept without fear. Days passed in gentle routine. Aaliyah helped around the house, sewing clothes for neighbors and saving every rupee she earned. Appa Salma became more than a caretaker. She became family. She massaged Aaliyah's back when the pain became unbearable, fed her nourishing meals, and listened when Aaliyah felt overwhelmed. One evening, after folding a pile of baby clothes she had stitched from scraps, Aaliyah looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, her cheeks hollow, but there was something fierce in her expression now. A quiet fire. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered, "I don't know what the future holds, but I promise you, I will never let anyone make you feel unwanted. I'll raise you with honor, with love, no matter what." The struggle was far from over. But for the first time, Aaliyah wasn't alone, and she had something stronger than pain: purpose. The wails of women in labor echoed off the grimy, overcrowded walls of the government hospital. The scent of antiseptic barely masked the odor of sweat, anxiety, and life being born amid chaos. Aaliyah lay on a thin cot in a corner of the crowded ward, gripping the edge with white knuckles as another wave of pain surged through her. Her body trembled, her eyes shut tight, sweat rolling down her forehead, but her lips moved in silent prayer. Appa Salma sat by her side, dabbing her forehead with a damp cloth. "Breathe, Beti. You're strong. Just a little more." Her voice was steady, soothing, the anchor Aaliyah clung to in that storm of agony. There were no private rooms, no painkillers, no luxury, only the raw struggle of childbirth shared by dozens of women at once, each separated by a thin curtain or nothing at all. After what felt like an eternity, a final push, a cry, a sound so pure it cut through the noise like sunlight through storm clouds. Aaliyah's eyes snapped open, her chest heaving. The nurse held up a wriggling, red-faced baby boy, his tiny fists clenched, his mouth open in protest at the harsh world he'd just entered. The nurse wrapped him in a thin, worn blanket and placed him in Aaliyah's arms. She gasped. Tears spilled freely as she looked down at him. He was so small, yet in that moment, he felt like the entire universe. She touched his cheek, marveling at the softness, the warmth, the miracle of his heartbeat against hers. "Zion," she whispered. "Your name is Zion, grace of God." Appa Salma sat beside her, eyes glistening. "He's beautiful. You did well, Aaliyah. You did so well." Aaliyah nodded, unable to speak. She didn't have a crib or clothes or savings, but she had Zion. And in that moment it felt like enough. The hospital discharged her in less than a day. With Zion cradled against her chest in a makeshift sling, Aliyah returned to Appa Salma's home, where the old woman had already prepared a small corner with hand-me-downs and a cradle crafted from a wooden basket. It wasn't much, but it was safe. It was home. Life wasn't easy. Aliyah returned to stitching clothes as soon as her body allowed. She took in orders from local women, repairing torn kurtas, hemming dupattas, sewing school uniforms, all while nursing Zion in between. Her fingers were often pricked and sore, her back ached from sleepless nights, but she never complained. Zion grew with the days, his laughter filling the small house with a joy it hadn't known in years. Appa Salma spoiled him with lullabies and mashed bananas, calling him her potly of light. Neighbors began to notice Aliyah's resilience, her quiet dignity, her fine needlework. Slowly, her reputation grew. More stitching orders came in. Enough to buy baby powder, enough to add a second meal to the day. With every stitch, every coin earned, Aliyah felt a new strength blossom inside her. She had lost everything once, but she was building again, one thread at a time. Sarmad stood at the top floor of his office building, gazing down at the city skyline. Neon signs blinked across the high-rises, traffic pulsed like veins through the roads, and every corner of the metropolis bore the touch of his influence. His company, once a small startup, had grown into a multi-million rupee empire within 3 years. Magazine covers bore his face. Business seminars quoted his strategy. Investors lined up to work with him. In the world's eyes, he had arrived. At home, the life he shared with Misha mirrored the same luxury. Their penthouse suite gleamed with imported marble floors, chandeliers from Italy, and abstract art that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. They vacationed in Europe, hosted elite cocktail parties, and owned everything from designer clothes to limited edition sports cars. Misha's Instagram overflowed with curated glimpses of their life: champagne breakfasts, yacht selfies, camel dinners in Dubai. But beneath the glitter, something festered. Sarmad began to change. His once ambitious, focused mind became scattered and restless. He grew colder, less tolerant, and deeply cynical. No success seemed to satisfy him for long. Deals that once excited him now felt hollow. He walked through meetings distracted, tossed away multi-crore opportunities just because they didn't feel right. The laughter in his voice had vanished, replaced with sharpness and sarcasm. At home, Misha was no comfort. Her affection was performative, reserved for when cameras or company were present. Behind closed doors, she was dismissive, nagging, and obsessed with appearances. Every conversation revolved around upgrades: better furniture, pricier jewelry, a newer car model, an even bigger ring. She criticized his wardrobe, his moods, his work hours, and most of all, his growing silence. When he was late for meetings, she accused him of cheating. When he withdrew emotionally, she mocked him for being too boring to love. The arguments started small, then turned vicious. She hurled things during fights, stormed out dramatically, and came home late with vague explanations. Sarmad stopped asking where she had been. He didn't want the answers. He began drinking more. First, just a glass to relax. Then 2. Then bottles. The whiskey helped quiet the noise in his mind, the relentless reminders that something was deeply wrong. But it never fully silenced the image he couldn't forget: Aliyah, drenched in rain, standing at the edge of his porch, eyes swollen with betrayal, clutching her stomach as she begged to be heard. At first, he shoved the memory aside, told himself she was manipulative, that she lied about the pregnancy, that she was weak, too emotional, a distraction. He repeated those lies like a mantra, but they never stuck for long. Because at night, when the parties ended and Misha retreated to her side of the king-sized bed, he would lie awake and see Aliyah's face. Not the one from when they were in love, laughing, hopeful, cooking noodles at midnight, but the one from the night he turned her away. The way her shoulders had slumped when she realized he wasn't going to change his mind. The way she didn't curse him, just looked at him like she didn't recognize him anymore. That look haunted him. He buried himself in work again. Launched new branches, chased awards, signed contracts worth fortunes, but none of it numbed the discomfort inside him. His home didn't feel like home. Misha didn't feel like love. And success didn't feel like victory. Sometimes, late at night, with a half-finished glass in hand, he caught himself whispering, "What if she was telling the truth? What if that child was mine?" He never spoke it aloud, never told anyone. But deep down, the doubt had taken root. And no matter how high he climbed, a single mistake from his past stood at the bottom of it all, staring up at him with tear-streaked eyes. The morning sun filtered through the old wooden windows of Appa Salma's house, casting soft golden light across the room where Aliyah had set up her sewing machine. The whir of the needle became the rhythm of her days, a steady hum that stitched not just fabric, but fragments of a broken life into something whole again. With Zion playing nearby on a straw mat, stacking bottle caps like building blocks, Aliyah would bend over her work with quiet focus, her hands moving swiftly, her mind sharp. What began as a few mending jobs from neighbors slowly grew into a small but steady business. Word spread that Aliyah's stitching was neat, her prices fair, and her nature respectful. School uniforms, dupattas, blouses, even wedding outfits. Orders came in more frequently and customers began recommending her to others. She didn't have a shop sign, only a board outside the gate reading, Silai Center, Aliyah Tailors. But that was enough. In a colony where women were often judged more than supported, her resilience became her reputation. Zion, as he grew, proved to be a bright child. He had a quiet curiosity and an old soul in his young eyes. He picked up books from the neighborhood library kiosk before he could read properly and asked questions that sometimes left Aliyah speechless. "Ammi, why don't I have a father like other kids?" he asked once, his voice innocent, not bitter. Aliyah paused her stitching, turned to him, and gently placed a hand on his cheek. "Because you were born to a mother who loved you enough for two," she said softly. "Sometimes life doesn't give us everything we want, but it gives us what we need." She never lied to him, but she spared him the cruelty. He would learn the full truth in time. For now, she taught him what mattered: honesty, courage, and hard work. But the road wasn't easy. There were days when Aliyah fell ill and couldn't work, when Zion caught fevers during the monsoon, and the medicine bills felt unbearable. There were weeks when flour ran low, and they survived on lentils and water. And always, there were whispers, the kind that stung more than wounds. "She's the one who got thrown out, right? No husband? Must have done something. That child doesn't even have a father's name." Some women avoided her shop altogether, afraid her story might stain their own reputation. But Aliyah bore it all with silent strength. She kept her eyes down, her work steady, her voice respectful. Slowly, the rumors faded, or maybe people just grew tired of their own cruelty. What remained was her skill, her kindness, and the growing loyalty of the women who had taken a chance on her. One day, a wealthy woman from a nearby colony came in, holding a designer suit with torn embroidery. "I was told only you could fix this," she said curtly. Aliyah took it without a word and returned it stitched so precisely that the woman returned the next week with 3 more. Soon, she was receiving orders from beyond her street, from boutiques looking for backup tailors and mothers who preferred her homemade touch over mass-produced factory wear. Aliyah expanded her space, rearranged furniture to create more room, and bought a second-hand sewing machine. She trained 2 neighborhood girls who wanted to learn the craft, teaching them as Appa Salma had once taught her, firmly but with heart. Zion, now in school, returned each afternoon to the smell of freshly ironed cloth and the sound of his mother's voice humming softly as she worked. He'd sit beside her, doing his homework while she finished her orders. They didn't have riches, but they had a home, warmth, food, and each other. And through every challenge, Aliyah stood firm, not as a victim, but as a warrior. A single mother with calloused hands, a full heart, and an unbreakable spirit. The grand ballroom of the 5-star hotel was adorned with crystal chandeliers, silk drapes, and white orchids imported from Thailand. Waiters moved in perfect rhythm, serving canapés to guests dressed in designer suits and embroidered saris. At the center of it all was a large banner. Empowering Future Leaders, Annual Student Excellence Awards, sponsored by Sarmad and Company. Sarmad stood near the stage, his hands tucked into his blazer pockets, scanning the crowd with practiced ease. Misha stood beside him, resplendent in a shimmering silver gown, sipping on her wine and complaining about the air conditioning being too cold. Sarmad only half listened. These events had lost their excitement long ago. That was, until a name was announced that made him pause mid-thought. And the winner of the national-level science scholarship, Zayan Aliyah. The applause was polite, but it grew as a young boy stepped onto the stage, a boy with sharp, intelligent eyes, neatly combed hair, and a quiet confidence far beyond his age. He accepted the award with grace, bowed slightly, and thanked the panel in fluent English before returning to his seat. Sarmad couldn't stop staring. There was something about the boy, the way he held himself, the slight tilt of his chin, the way he smiled only with his eyes. Something familiar stirred in his chest. Before he could make sense of it, the crowd parted slightly, and a woman stepped forward, walking toward the table where Zayan now sat. She adjusted his collar, whispered something in his ear, and smiled with the soft tenderness only a mother could show. Sarmad's heart stopped. It was her, Aliyah. She hadn't changed much. Her features had matured, sharpened with time and struggle, but her grace remained untouched. She wore a simple navy blue shalwar kameez, her dupatta draped neatly, her expression calm but alert. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the noise of the room fell away. He was no longer the successful CEO. She was no longer the abandoned girl from that stormy night. They were just two people caught in a gaze heavy with unspoken history. Misha followed his line of sight and scoffed, loud enough for him to hear. "Isn't that the girl you used to date? The one who turned up crying on your doorstep?" Sarmad didn't answer. He barely heard her. His focus remained on the boy. The resemblance was becoming impossible to ignore. The shape of his face, the arch of his brow. It wasn't just coincidence. His name. Zayan Aliyah. Not just Zayan. No father's name. No legal claim. Just her. Driven by something deeper than logic, Sarmad slipped away from Misha and made his way behind the stage. He found a quiet corridor and waited. Moments later, Aliyah walked through, Zayan beside her, holding his prize. "Aliyah," Sarmad said quietly. She stopped in her tracks. Zayan looked up at him curiously, sensing the tension. Aliyah's expression didn't falter. "Mr. Sarmad, you've done well for yourself." He ignored the formality. His eyes moved to Zayan. "He's mine, isn't he?" Zayan's brows furrowed. "Ami?" Aliyah turned to her son gently. "Zayan, wait for me by the car, Beta." The boy obeyed without question. Once he was gone, Sarmad stepped forward. "You should have told me." "I tried," she said softly. "You didn't want to listen." "I didn't know." "You didn't care to know," she cut in, her tone firm but not angry. "You made your choice. I made mine. We survived. We lived." He swallowed hard. "I want to be part of his life." "You lost that right," Aliyah replied, her voice now quiet. "He doesn't know you. He doesn't need confusion. I didn't bring him here to punish you. I brought him here because he earned this. On his own." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her posture composed, her steps unwavering. Sarmad stood alone in the hallway, the applause from the ballroom fading behind him, replaced by the hollow realization that he hadn't just lost a child. He had lost time, moments, a lifetime of memories that would never be his. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tinted windows of the parking garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Aliyah walked briskly toward her car, keys clutched in one hand, her other resting protectively on Zayan's shoulder. He walked quietly beside her, glancing up at her now and then, sensing the heaviness in her silence. "Sarmad, Uncle looked upset," he said hesitantly. Aliyah forced a small smile. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Beta." But before they could reach the car, footsteps echoed behind them. Sarmad's voice followed. "Aliyah, please. Don't walk away again. Not this time." She turned, slowly and calmly, her hand never leaving her son's shoulder. Zion looked between the two adults, unsure of what was unfolding. Sarmad came to a halt a few feet away. His suit was still pristine, but the composure he wore like armor all these years was cracking. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression raw. "You owe me a conversation," he said, breathless. "I deserve that much." Aliyah raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" He took a hesitant step closer. "I was wrong. I was young, stupid, scared. But I didn't know. I didn't know about him." "You didn't care to ask," she replied softly. There was no anger in her tone, just quiet truth. That, somehow, made it cut deeper. "You remember that night? When I stood in the rain? When I told you I was carrying your child?" Her voice didn't waver. "You didn't ask for proof. You didn't listen. You humiliated me and closed the door in my face." Sarmad looked down, shame blooming across his features. "I begged you. I had nowhere to go. I was terrified. And you..." Her voice cracked just slightly before she steadied herself. "You threw me out like I was nothing." Zion stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting between them. Sarmad looked at him, his voice barely a whisper. "Zion, I'm..." "No," Aliyah interrupted. "He doesn't need to hear it from you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." She turned to Zion gently, crouching to his level. "Beta, sit in the car for a moment, please." He hesitated. "He's my father?" Her heart sank. She nodded slowly. "Yes. But I'll explain everything soon, okay?" Zion gave her a searching look before nodding and walking to the car. He climbed in silently, closing the door without a word. Aliyah stood and faced Sarmad again. "I didn't come to you because I didn't want pity. I didn't want money. I didn't need your help. I raised our son alone. I fed him, clothed him, educated him, without a single rupee from you. I worked myself to exhaustion. I got sick. I cried into my pillow every night for months, but I never let him see me fall." Sarmad's eyes filled with tears. "Please, let me be in his life. Let me try to be his father." She shook her head slowly, resolutely. "You lost that right the day you turned your back on us. Love isn't something you pick up after years of silence. You don't get to step in now because guilt is knocking on your conscience." He staggered back as if struck, speechless. "I protected him from the pain of rejection. I protected him from knowing the truth of what his father did. Don't make me regret that now." Sarmad opened his mouth to plead again, but her expression silenced him. "You may be his biological father," she said, "but being a parent? That's earned. And you never even tried." She walked to the car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Through the windshield, Sarmad watched as Zion looked up at his mother with confusion and sadness. Then they drove off, leaving him standing in a pool of sunlight, lost, haunted, and alone. The headlines spread like wildfire. CEO's partner caught in financial scandal, luxury lifestyle funded by fraud. Misha's name was everywhere, on the news, on social media, and in corporate boardrooms. Within 48 hours, her carefully constructed image crumbled into dust. It began with whispers from the finance department, discrepancies in accounts, lavish expenses listed under consulting, high-value jewelry billed to company funds. But it didn't stay internal for long. An internal audit exposed the truth. Misha had been embezzling money for months. Fake invoices, backdated transfers, inflated contracts. She had perfected the art of siphoning money without raising alarm. But greed always leaves a trail. And Misha had been too arrogant to cover hers. Sarmad found out from his CFO, not Misha. The betrayal hit harder than he expected. He remembered all those late-night arguments, the mysterious disappearances, the unexplained spending sprees. He had ignored the signs, justifying them as part of her extravagant personality. Now he realized it had all been a mask. The woman who once charmed investors and danced with him at fundraisers had been gutting his empire from the inside. Within days, clients began pulling out. Partners demanded explanations. Stockholders questioned his judgment. "How could you not know?" they asked. "How could you trust someone like her with that kind of access?" His credibility collapsed faster than the market value of his company. Board members who once toasted to his brilliance now avoided eye contact. Journalists dug up everything, from Misha's affairs with other executives to private emails mocking Sarmad behind his back. He sat alone in his office, the city lights blinking outside, but the room colder than ever. A half-drunk glass of scotch sat untouched on the table. There were no phone calls, no messages of support, just silence and the echo of his own thoughts. He had chosen Misha over Aliyah. He had thrown away a woman who had loved him purely for one who only saw him as a stepping stone to luxury. He had traded loyalty for lust, depth for appearances. Now, stripped of the applause, the prestige, and the illusion, Sarmad was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. For the first time in years, he didn't feel angry or powerful. He just felt small. And as he stared at the empty chair across from him, he wished more than anything that the person sitting there had been Aliyah. Sarmad sat at his desk surrounded by torn drafts and envelopes, each one carrying words he couldn't quite get right. The final version was simple, heartfelt, and handwritten, no corporate logos, no signatures in gold ink. Just the truth. He slipped the letter into a plain envelope and mailed it to Aliyah's address, not knowing if she still lived there. Inside, he wrote no justifications, no excuses, only an apology. I failed you. I failed him. But I think about you both every single day. The letter came back unopened. So did the bouquet of white lilies he sent a week later, and the large box of books for Zion. Every gesture was returned untouched, the packaging still perfectly sealed. Aliyah wasn't interested in apologies. Sarmad understood. Still, he couldn't stop trying. When he learned Zion's school fees were overdue, an anonymous tip from a former employee who now taught there, he wired the full payment under a fictitious donor name. When Zion's science project needed advanced components his school couldn't afford, Sarmad quietly funded the entire model through a foundation, never attaching his name. He watched from a distance as Zion flourished. The boy was brilliant, observant, and articulate. His project on sustainable energy went viral in academic circles. Teachers praised his manners and curiosity. One judge at the regional science fair even commented, "He's the kind of kid who could change the world." For Sarmad, every word stung with bittersweet pride. When Zion was selected to represent the province at the National Youth Science Competition in Islamabad, the moment felt both triumphant and painful. Sarmad didn't dare attend. He knew his presence would only complicate things. But he followed every update online, watching from the shadows like a ghost clinging to a life he had once rejected. Then, one morning a knock came at his door. Aliyah stood there, quiet and composed, Zion beside her. The boy held a folder with competition documents, his gaze wary but curious. Aliyah spoke first. "He wants to meet you. Just once. Supervised. Nothing more." Sarmad's heart threatened to break right there. They sat together in a nearby park, away from cameras and attention. Zion asked questions, not about business, not about money, but about who Sarmad had been before everything went wrong. "Were you always like this?" he asked. "Or did you become this person after leaving us?" Sarmad didn't pretend. "I made terrible choices. I was weak, selfish, and blind to what really mattered. You're the only thing I've done right, just by existing." Zion didn't say much, but when he stood up to leave, he extended his hand politely. Sarmad shook it, holding on just a second longer than he should have. Aliyah gave a brief nod, then walked away with her son. Sarmad remained seated on the bench, the winter breeze brushing past him, carrying a strange feeling that wasn't quite peace, but maybe the beginning of something close. The auditorium was packed, its walls decorated with banners celebrating youth innovation and excellence. Rows of proud parents, mentors, and dignitaries sat with glowing faces, waiting for the final award of the evening. Cameras rolled, spotlights moved, and applause echoed every few minutes. On stage stood a podium lined with microphones, and beside it, a silver trophy awaiting its recipient. When the host stepped up and announced, "And now, the National Award for Scientific Innovation goes to Zion Aliyah," The room erupted in cheers. Zion walked to the stage with steady steps, dressed in a sharp black suit stitched by the very hands that had raised him. At 21, he carried himself with a quiet confidence, the kind born not just from intellect, but from endurance. He accepted the trophy with a nod, waited for the applause to settle, and stepped up to the microphone. His voice was calm but rich with emotion. "Good evening, everyone. I stand here today not just as a winner, but as a son. A proud son." There was a pause. My journey wasn't easy. I didn't come from wealth or connections. I came from a single-room home where the sewing machine ran louder than the fan, where bills piled up and meals were sometimes shared in silence. But I also came from a place filled with strength, with courage, with love. The audience leaned in. "My mother," he continued, eyes searching the crowd until they landed on her. "She is the reason I am who I am. She raised me alone, faced every hardship with her chin up, taught me to never bend to shame or bitterness. She worked until her fingers bled, yet she never let me feel we lacked anything. In every sense of the word, she is my parent, my guide, my hero." Aaliyah sat in the second row, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Her hands clutched her dupatta tightly, her chest rising with quiet, overwhelmed pride. Zion hesitated for a moment, then added, "Some people are born with a father in their lives. I was not. But I was born with the kind of mother that made both roles unnecessary. And for that, I consider myself luckier than most." The room was silent. Then came a thunderous wave of applause, louder than any that night. At the very back of the hall, hidden behind the crowd, Sarmad sat alone. His hands trembled in his lap, eyes brimming with tears. He hadn't been invited, but he came anyway. He needed to see the man his son had become. And now, as he watched Zion command the stage, he felt a surge of pride and unbearable regret. That should have been his seat in the front row. But he knew he hadn't earned it. When the ceremony ended, Aaliyah rose slowly from her chair. She walked toward the exit, past camera crews and murmuring guests, her posture graceful, her face serene. She didn't seek attention. She didn't need it. The one person who mattered had already said everything she needed to hear. As she reached the hall's doors, she paused, glanced once at the stage where Zion was still taking pictures, then at the shadows in the back where she knew Sarmad sat watching. And she smiled, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but from a deep, quiet knowing. He may have thrown her out, but life invited her in.